The first sound you hear isn't a loving coo or the gentle voice of your mother. It's a low, resonant hum. The first thing you feel isn't a warm blanket, but the biting cold of a sterile, metallic slab against your newborn skin. You take your first breath, and the air tastes of sterilized metal and a chilling sense of judgment. Congratulations! You've just been born into the Viltrumite Empire, and your first test has already begun. There are no celebrations here, no proud parents counting your fingers and toes. There is only an audit. Your tiny, perfect body, capable of one day shattering moons, is now being scanned, analyzed, and measured against an impossible standard of genetic purity. Think of it as the most ruthless quality assurance check in the universe. You are not a child. You are a potential asset, and your value is determined before you can even focus your eyes. Every cell in your body is screaming its potential, but a single microscopic flaw, a slight deviation from the blueprint, is not a charming quirk. It's a death sentence. But what if you pass? What if your DNA is the perfect, unblemished cocktail of cosmic superiority? You get to live. For now. You get the privilege of being raised by a society that looked at its own population, with all its poets, thinkers, and lovers, and decided that half of them were simply taking up space. This wasn't some ancient, forgotten tragedy. This was policy. This was a vision. This is the legacy of the Great Purge. It's not just a chapter in a history book. It's the founding principle of your new family. Your leaders decided that the only way to be truly strong was to eliminate all weakness, starting with themselves. So they did. They turned on their neighbors, their friends, their own families. Brother against brother, parent against child, in a planetary civil war that wasn't about ideology, but about genetic housekeeping. The weak were systematically and efficiently removed from the gene pool. Imagine the sounds of that, the screams, the shattering of cities, and then the silence. A silence bought by the culling of billions, all to create a more streamlined population. Your very existence is a testament to this brutality. You are the product of murderers who murdered their own kind for not being murderous enough. The pressure is on, isn't it? Every moment of your life will be a performance to prove you were worth keeping, to prove you aren't a throwback to the old days when Viltrumites could afford the luxury of compassion. Every failure, every hesitation, will be seen through the lens of that purge. Are you strong enough? Or are you just another error that needs to be corrected? The ghosts of those they killed are your invisible audience, and the judges are the ones who held the blades. And if that internal pressure wasn't enough, the universe decided to run its own, more efficient, purity test. It's called the Scourge virus. A plague engineered for the singular purpose of turning Viltrumite physiology into a self-destructing nightmare. It swept through your people, a silent, unstoppable tide that cared nothing for their strength or their pride. It found the tiniest crack in their godlike immune systems and ripped it wide open, turning their greatest asset, their biology, against them. It was a plague so effective, it wiped out over 99% of your species. For you, a newborn, this isn't history. This is your inheritance. You are one of a handful of straws pulled from a planetary haystack, a statistical anomaly who survived a biological apocalypse before you even knew what a virus was. The air you breathe is thick with the memory of that plague. The few thousand Viltrumites left are the survivors, the ones whose bodies didn't just fight the virus, but annihilated it. They are the true elite, the proven pure, and you are now expected to stand among them. No pressure, kid. You only have to live up to the standard of being literally immune to a god-killing disease. So, you've survived the genetic lottery at birth, the cultural mandate for perfection, and the biological ghost of a genocide-level plague. You are, by all accounts, one of the most durable organisms ever conceived. Your reward for winning this horrific cosmic lottery? A lifetime of service to an empire that would have snuffed you out for having a slightly weaker than average immune system. But don't go thinking your survival earns you a moment of peace. Oh no. The lottery is over. Now, your real education begins. Forget everything you know about childhood. Forget scraped knees from learning to ride a bike. Forget bedtime stories. Forget the reassuring warmth of a parent's hug after a nightmare. Your nursery is a gladiator pit, and your lullabies are the grunts of exertion and the sharp crack of bone. Congratulations, you've graduated from the survival phase to the training phase, and it's going to hurt. Your body is a weapon, and your childhood is the forge. The moment you can walk, you're taught to fight. There are no friendly play dates, no learning to share toys. Your peers are not your friends. They are your competition, your sparring partners, and a constant living reminder that you are only as good as your last victory. Your first lesson in social interaction is learning how to block a punch. Your second is learning how to throw one that lands with enough force to make a statement. Compassion, empathy, those are alien concepts, sentimental baggage that was purged from your culture generations ago. You're taught to see them as a disease, a weakness that will get you and the empire killed. Think of it as the most brutal, high-stakes after-school program in existence. Your tutors are battle-hardened veterans, like General Craig, men whose faces are maps of 1,000 brutal conflicts. Their teaching method is simple. Push you until you break, then watch you put yourself back together, stronger. They will throw you off mountains to encourage you to fly. They will force you to hold your breath in a vacuum until your lungs feel like they're collapsing into singularities. There's no safe word. There's no time out. There is only the objective, and your pain is an irrelevant variable in the equation. Every day is a grueling physical exam. You'll be pitted against creatures from conquered worlds, beasts with claws that can shear through steel and hides thicker than a bunker wall. You are expected not just to survive, but to dominate. To tear them apart with your bare hands and stand, splattered in their alien viscera, ready for the next lesson. A broken arm isn't an excuse to go to the infirmary. It's a practical lesson in bone setting under duress. Exhaustion is not a reason to stop. It's a mental barrier you are expected to shatter through sheer force of will. But the physical conditioning is only half of it. The psychological programming is far more insidious. You are raised on a steady diet of imperial propaganda. The Viltrumite Empire is everything. It is strength. It is order. It is truth. All other civilizations are either obstacles to be removed or resources to be exploited. They are lesser, weaker. You will memorize the names of conquered worlds the way other children memorize nursery rhymes. You will study the anatomy of 100 different species, not out of scientific curiosity, but to learn their weakest points, where to strike, how to break them. Your own history is presented as a glorious, unbroken chain of dominance. The Great Purge, not a genocide, but a necessary act of self-improvement. The subjugation of entire galaxies, not imperialism, but a benevolent act of bringing order to a chaotic universe. You will believe this. You will have to. Because any flicker of doubt, any hint of independent thought that deviates from the party line is a sign of that dreaded weakness. And you know what happens to the weak. There is no room for you in your own mind. Your identity is systematically dismantled and rebuilt in the image of the Empire. Your desires are the Empire's desires. Your will is the Empire's will. Thrag, the Grand Regent, is not just your leader. He is your God. His word is absolute law, and his disappointment is more terrifying than any physical threat. You are being forged into a perfect soldier, an instrument of his will, utterly and unbreakably loyal. You learn to suppress your emotions not because it's a sign of maturity, but because feelings are liabilities. Love, fear, sadness, they are glitches in the system that must be patched out. So what are you left with? You're a teenager with the power to level a city, but you have the emotional range of a brick. You can calculate the trajectory to fly from one star system to another, but you wouldn't know how to have a normal conversation. You have been meticulously sculpted into a sociopathic killing machine, convinced of your own superiority and utterly dedicated to a totalitarian cause. You are a child soldier on a cosmic scale, and as your powers finally begin to bloom, as you cross that threshold into true Viltrumite adulthood, you might think the worst is over. You've been broken, reforged, and programmed, but you haven't yet confronted the daily, soul-crushing reality of what it actually feels like to be a god. And it's so much worse than you can imagine. So, you've done it. You've unlocked the full suite of Viltrumite abilities. You can fly faster than light, lift mountains, and survive the vacuum of space. You are, for all intents and purposes, a god. Welcome to the most boring, frustrating, and isolating existence imaginable. The poets and dreamers on lesser worlds write epics about this kind of power. They have no idea what they're asking for. Let's start with the basics of your day-to-day life. Touch. Remember the feeling of soft grass under your feet? The warmth of a fire? The delicate texture of a piece of fruit? Forget them. Your skin is now so durable, your nerves so insulated, that the world has become a dull, textureless void. Everything feels like plastic wrap. Shaking someone's hand requires the same level of concentration as a brain surgeon performing an operation, because a moment's inattention will turn their hand into a bag of shattered bones and pulp. You live in a constant state of restraint, a walking catastrophe holding itself in check. Every door handle you turn, every chair you sit in, is a test of your fine motor control. Fail, and you've just ripped the door off its hinges or shattered the chair into splinters. It's not a show of strength, it's an embarrassing, tedious chore. And the sounds. Your hearing is now so acute, you can pick up a conversation from miles away. Sounds great, right? A superpower for eavesdropping. The reality is a perpetual, low-grade sensory assault. The constant, overlapping hum of a planet's worth of life is a headache that never ends. The buzzing of insects is a roar. The distant rumble of traffic is a grinding earthquake. You have to actively filter out 1 billion different noises just to think straight. The only true peace is the deafening, absolute silence of deep space. And even that comes with its own brand of existential dread. Flight. The ultimate symbol of freedom. It's what everyone dreams of. Soaring through the clouds, dancing among the stars. Your version is a little different. For you, flight is just commuting. A brutally efficient but utterly sterile mode of transport. There's no wind in your hair in a vacuum. There's no sensation of speed when you're outracing light itself. It's just you, alone in an endless, black, silent expanse, for weeks, months, or even years at a time. It's the longest, most boring road trip in history, with a destination that's usually a planet full of beings you're about to terrorize. You're not a soaring eagle, you're a biological missile pointed at a target. But what about the thrill of the fight? The rush of invincibility? That's another myth. Being nearly invulnerable means that 99.9% of the universe poses zero threat to you. Combat isn't a challenge, it's pest control. It's like a human fighting an ant colony. There's no glory, no struggle, just the messy, tedious work of extermination. You don't feel their punches. You don't fear their weapons. You just wade through them, a walking natural disaster, feeling nothing but a profound, soul-crushing boredom. The real horror isn't the lack of feeling, however. It's what happens when you do feel something. When you finally encounter a force that can hurt you, another Viltrumite, a creature of immense power, or one of the universe's rare exotic threats. Because your body is built to withstand supernova-level forces, the pain you experience is on a scale a mortal mind cannot comprehend. It's not a broken bone. It's the feeling of your entire skeletal structure being pulverized at a molecular level. It's not a cut. It's the sensation of your nigh invulnerable skin being torn apart atom by atom. The pain is so absolute, so overwhelming, it becomes its own dimension of existence. You've spent your entire life in a sensory deprivation tank, and suddenly, someone has plugged your nervous system directly into the heart of a dying star. This is the paradox of your power. You are numb to all of life's simple pleasures, but hypersensitive to world-shattering agony. You are insulated from joy, but have a front-row seat to unimaginable suffering, most of it inflicted by you. You crave a challenge, a real fight. But when you find one, the price is a level of pain that would vaporize the consciousness of a lesser being. You are a god, yes. A god of tedium, isolation, and excruciating pain. You've got the powers. You've mastered the misery of having them. So, what do you actually do with all this? What's your divine purpose? Well, it's time to clock in for your day job, and the Viltrumite Empire has a very specific career path in mind for you. So you're a fully fledged Viltrumite, brimming with power and purpose. What is that purpose? To serve the Empire. And what does that mean in practical terms? Congratulations, you're now a glorified one-man demolition and planetary takeover crew. This isn't a glorious crusade. This is your job. And like any job, it's mostly grueling, repetitive, and soul-crushingly mundane. Your assignment arrives, a designation for a new star system, a file on the dominant species. Your task is simple: fly there and pacify the planet. Make it a productive new asset for the ever-expanding Viltrumite Empire. Think of yourself as a consultant for a hostile corporate takeover, where the negotiation involves breaking the planet's leadership over your knee. Literally. You are the sole representative of the galaxy's most ruthless interstellar conglomerate, and you've come to downsize their independence. First, you make your grand entrance. You hover over their most populated city, a silent, menacing god in the sky. This is the initial presentation, the shock and awe phase. You let them scramble their primitive jets, fire their useless missiles that shatter like children's toys against your chest. You let them see the futility. It's not a fight, it's a demonstration. You are showing them that their concept of power is a joke. This part might feel empowering for the first, maybe second time. By the dozenth, it's just a tedious formality, like filling out the same form over and over again. Next comes the ultimatum. You find their leaders, whether they're in a palace, a parliament, or a bunker. You walk through their walls, brushing aside their elite guards like dust bunnies. Then you deliver the company script. Your world now belongs to the Viltrumite Empire. Your technology, your resources, and your people will be repurposed to serve us. Cooperate, and you will be allowed a measure of managed autonomy. Resist, and you will be made an example of. There's no room for negotiation. You're not a diplomat. You are human resources, delivering the terms of their unconditional surrender. And inevitably, they resist. It's a predictable, almost charming, display of spirit. They have their pride, their culture, their heroes. They will fight for their freedom, and you will be the one to systematically and dispassionately dismantle it all. This isn't an epic battle like the ones in their legends. It's a methodical process. You topple their monuments, you shatter their armies, you find their strongest champion, their chosen one, and you break them in the most public and humiliating way possible. You do this not out of malice, but out of cold, brutal efficiency. It's the quickest way to crush their morale. It's pest control on a planetary scale. You'll spend months, maybe years, on a single world, flying from continent to continent, putting down rebellions, destroying infrastructure. It's dirty work. You'll be covered in the blood and entrails of species you didn't even bother to learn the name of. You'll hear the screams of a billion beings cursing your name, and through it all, you will feel nothing. Or worse, you'll feel tired, annoyed. This isn't the glorious conquest you were programmed to crave. It's a slog, an endless, messy, and deeply unsatisfying project. And then there's the bureaucracy. Oh yes, the Viltrumite Empire, for all its talk of strength and purity, runs on paperwork. After you've broken a world, you have to file the reports, assessments of the planet's resources, analysis of the indigenous population's potential for servitude, a detailed account of how you neutralized their defenses. You are a conqueror of worlds who has to fill out after-action reports like a middle manager. Fail to file the correct forms, and you'll get a stern talking to from a superior officer. The sheer cosmic absurdity of it is staggering. You can crack a moon with a punch, but you're still subject to administrative oversight. This is your life's work, a perpetual cycle of travel, threat, demolition, and paperwork. You are not a warrior king. You are a tool. An incredibly effective, reusable, and self-repairing hammer. And the universe is full of nails that need to be pounded into submission. The glory of the Empire is an abstract concept from a distant boardroom. Your reality is the mud, the blood, and the bureaucratic follow-up. But surely, in the eons of your service, you can find some personal connection, some solace in a relationship, a family. Don't be ridiculous. That's a weakness. And the Empire has a very specific policy on that too. After centuries of brutal conquest and mind-numbing paperwork, a strange, treacherous thought might creep into your head, a desire for something more, a connection, a partner, maybe even a family. This is the most dangerous form of rebellion you can possibly imagine, because in the Viltrumite Empire, love is not a virtue. It's a strategic liability. Let's be clear. The Empire encourages breeding. In fact, it's your duty. With your species decimated by the scourge virus, repopulation is a top priority. But this has nothing to do with love or companionship. It is a calculated biological imperative. Your potential partner is not chosen for their wit or their kindness. They are selected for their genetic compatibility. A fellow Viltrumite is a rare and precious resource, an ideal match for creating pure-blooded offspring. The goal is to produce another soldier, another asset for the Empire. Your union is a transaction, and your child is the product. Affection is an inefficient, unnecessary byproduct. But what happens when you're stationed on a lesser world for decades, or even centuries? You're surrounded by beings with short, fragile, vibrant lives. Beings who love, laugh, and form bonds with a desperate passion you've never known. You might find yourself drawn to one of them. You might even fall in love. This is where the true horror begins. Your empire has a protocol for this. It's an approved, even encouraged, infiltration strategy. You are permitted to take a native spouse, to build a life, to raise a family. They see it as a long-term investment. Your half-breed child will still possess a fraction of Viltrumite strength, a potential future warrior, and your position within this lesser society gives you the perfect cover to prepare it for eventual takeover. You are not a husband or a father. You are a deep cover agent, and your family is your operational base. Every tender moment, every shared laugh, every "I love you" is a lie, layered on top of your true mission. You watch your human partner age. Their hair turns gray, their skin wrinkles, their body grows frail while you remain eternally in your prime. You see the light in their eyes dim as the decades fly by like seconds to you. You are a god living amongst insects, and your mayfly lover is dying before your very eyes. And you have to pretend it's a tragedy, while your internal Viltrumite conditioning screams that it is simply the natural order. It's a weakness being shed. And your children. You raise them. You teach them to ride a bike. You help them with their homework. You might even feel a flicker of something you think is paternal pride. But you know the truth. You are not raising a person. You are monitoring a developing weapon. The moment their powers manifest, their childhood is over. You are now their drill sergeant, tasked with preparing them for their true purpose, to serve the Viltrumite Empire. And that means forcing them to abandon everything they love about their home world. You must be the one to tell them that their mother, their friends, their entire civilization are inferior and disposable. You become the monster that shatters their world, just as your tutors once shattered you. This isn't a hypothetical. This is the playbook. Look at Omni-Man. He had a wife he may have genuinely loved. He had a son, And when the time came, his programming kicked in. He was ordered to murder his own child for refusing to join the cause. He beat his son to within an inch of his life, not with rage, but with a cold, terrifying sense of duty. He told him what every Viltrumite believes. What will you have after 500 years? Everyone and everything you know will be gone. Your love for these creatures is a temporary distraction. The Empire is forever. Any genuine attachment you form is a weapon that will be used against you. Your enemies will target your family because they are your only vulnerability. Your superiors will use them as leverage to ensure your loyalty. And in the end, you will be forced to make a choice: the fleeting, fragile warmth of a family you've come to love, or the cold, eternal demands of the empire you were born to serve. There is no happy ending here. You either betray the ones you love, or you betray your very nature, marking yourself as a traitor to be hunted down and purged. Love isn't a salvation, it's a trap. It's the most exquisitely painful way for the Empire to remind you that you own nothing, not even your own heart. And as you outlive everyone you ever cared for, you are left with only one companion, an eternity of regret and duty. So you've endured it all: the brutal birth, the torturous training, the sensory hell of godhood, the thankless job of a cosmic enforcer, and the exquisite agony of love and loss. What's your reward for this lifetime of suffering? More of it, forever. The single greatest perk of being a Viltrumite, your near immortality, is not a gift. It is the final, ultimate, and most perfect punishment. In your first few centuries, you might not feel it. Time is still a concept you can grasp. But as the centuries bleed into millennia, a profound and chilling alienation begins to set in. You watch civilizations rise from the dust, build glittering cities that touch the clouds, write their poetry, sing their songs, and then crumble back into nothing. You see entire species evolve and go extinct. They are ripples on the surface of a pond, and you are the cold, unmoving stone at the bottom. Their triumphs and tragedies become a blur, a repetitive, meaningless cycle that you are cursed to witness, over and over again. Every connection you ever made with a lesser being is a fleeting memory that becomes sharper and more painful with time. You will remember the exact shade of your human wife's eyes as she lay on her deathbed, a ghost that will haunt you for 10,000 years. You will remember your son's look of betrayal, an image seared into your mind that will never fade. You will outlive your children, your grandchildren, and their entire lineage, until their memory is nothing but a story you tell yourself in the silent darkness between galaxies. You become a walking mausoleum of dead friends and forgotten loves, and what of your own kind? The few thousand Viltrumites left? They are not your friends. They are your colleagues in the grim business of empire. They are your rivals, your superiors, and your potential executioners. The only thing that binds you together is a shared ideology of violent supremacy and a mutual, unspoken trauma. There is no camaraderie, no brotherhood, just the cold, professional respect of one predator for another. You are utterly, completely alone in a universe filled with beings you can't relate to and surrounded by peers you can't trust. The mission never ends. There will always be another world to conquer, another rebellion to crush, another report to file. The Empire's hunger is insatiable. You are a cog in a machine that is designed to run for eternity. Your existence loses all meaning and becomes a sequence of tasks. Fly, subjugate, report, repeat. The concepts of progress or retirement are laughable. Your only exit from service is death, and you are almost impossible to kill. It's not a life, it's a sentence. A life sentence, with the life part being a variable that stretches into infinity. Think about the sheer mind-breaking scale of it. You will watch stars be born, burn for billions of years, and die. You will see the very shape of galaxies shift and change. Everything you thought was permanent will prove to be ephemeral. Everything except you. You are the constant. A lonely, violent god adrift in a sea of cosmic change, clinging to a brutal ideology because it's the only thing that gives your endless existence a sliver of purpose. But in the deep, silent moments, you know the truth. The conquests are hollow. The empire is just a gang of traumatized survivors clinging to power. And your strength is a cage. So, would you want to be a Viltrumite? Would you trade your fragile, fleeting, beautiful human life for this? For the power to move mountains, but the inability to feel a gentle breeze? For the honor of serving a genocidal empire? For an eternity of watching everything you could ever love turn to dust? You are not a superhero. You are not a god. You are a prisoner of your own biology, a slave to a totalitarian regime, and a ghost haunting the timeline of the universe. Your name will be a curse whispered on 1,000,000 dead worlds, and your only legacy will be the silence that follows in your wake. Forget the dream of flying. The reality of being a Viltrumite is an unending, unchanging, and inescapable nightmare. Welcome to forever. There's no getting out. Welcome, fellow travelers, to the celestial dining hall of Asgard, a place where the feasts are as legendary as the gods themselves. Now, we all know the eternal question that has plagued humanity since the dawn of time. What's for dinner? It's a daily crisis of creativity and resources. But the Norse gods, in their infinite wisdom and borderline absurd practicality, solved this problem with a level of finality that would make a meal prep influencer weep with envy. They didn't just plan for the week, they planned for eternity. And the main course on their forever menu was a creature of mythic proportions, a boar named Saehrimnir, the star of a culinary Groundhog Day that never, ever ended. So, what exactly goes into preparing a meal that is, by definition, infinite? The recipe begins with one magical, self-resurrecting boar. Every evening, this magnificent beast was served up to the hungry warriors of Valhalla. And every morning, it would be miraculously whole again, ready for another round in the divine oven. The task of preparing this eternal entree fell to the chef of the gods, a fellow named Andrimnir. We must pour one out for Andrimnir, truly the most overworked and underappreciated chef in all the 9 realms. Imagine the existential dread of knowing your entire professional existence, for all of time, consists of cooking the exact same pork dish. No seasonal specials, no creative new sauces, just the same boar, day in and day out. He cooked this perpetual pork in a cauldron of cosmic size called Eldrimnir, a pot so vast it was likely less of a cooking vessel and more of a porcine hot tub. The sheer logistics of this are staggering. This wasn't just cooking, it was a sacred, relentless duty, ensuring the heroes of Valhalla never had to face the terrifying prospect of a dinnerless evening. But what did it taste like? After all, if you're going to eat the same thing for eternity, it had better be good. By all accounts, Saehrimnir was the pinnacle of pork perfection. This was no bland, factory-farmed meat. This was a dish cooked by a god, for gods and heroes. Imagine the scent wafting through the great hall of Valhalla, a rich, intoxicating aroma of roasting meat, basted in its own divine juices, seasoned with herbs that probably grew on the sun-drenched slopes of Asgard itself. The skin would have been a masterpiece of texture, a salty, earth-shattering crackling that echoed through the hall with every bite. The meat beneath would be impossibly tender, falling off the bone, a succulent, flavorful marvel that would instantly erase the memory of having been mortally wounded in battle just hours before. It was a taste of pure, unadulterated glory. And yet, one has to wonder, did anyone ever get tired of it? Did a Viking hero, after his 500th consecutive pork dinner, ever lean over to his shield brother and whisper, "You know what I could really go for? A nice piece of fish. Or maybe chicken." The myths don't say, but the human palate craves variety, a concept seemingly lost in the grandeur of Valhalla's menu. This culinary Ouroboros, however, wasn't just about satisfying hunger. It served a crucial social and psychological purpose. The diners were the Einherjar, the spirits of the greatest human warriors who died valiantly in battle. Their afterlife wasn't one of peaceful repose on a fluffy cloud. It was an eternal training montage for Ragnarok, the final battle at the end of the world. They spent their days gleefully hacking each other to pieces on the battlefield, only to be miraculously healed in time for supper. Saehrimnir was the fuel for this glorious, unending violence. It was a high-calorie, protein-packed recovery meal of the gods, designed to replenish their strength and get them ready for another day of joyous dismemberment. The feast was a nightly affirmation of their status. Eating this divine boar was a symbol of their worthiness, a communion that bound them together in their shared, bloody purpose. It was less a fine dining experience, and more a sacred, chaotic refueling station for the world's most aggressive fight club. Saehrimnir was the ultimate solution to the problem of feeding an army of the dead, a sustainable, delicious, and psychologically potent main course that never ran out. It was a fixed point in a chaotic afterlife, the one thing the warriors could always count on besides a good fight. But as convenient as an infinite stationary buffet may be, it wasn't very practical for a god on the move. So what did a deity do when they needed a regenerating meal that could, say, fit in the back of their chariot? As it turns out, the god of thunder had his own, far more portable version of this eternal feast. While the heroes in Valhalla were enjoying their eternal pork subscription, the god of thunder had a far more practical, on-the-go catering solution. Thor, ever the man of action, couldn't be tethered to a single dining hall. He had realms to protect, giants to challenge, and a divine reputation to uphold. For him, dinner needed to be fast, reliable, and preferably something he could pull with his own chariot. Enter Tangrisnir and Tangjoster, which translate to teeth-bearer and teeth-grinder. These weren't just any goats, they were Thor's loyal companions, his primary mode of transport, and, when the occasion called for it, his personal, self-rejuvenating emergency rations. This was the ultimate mythological food truck, serving up a divine feast wherever the god of thunder happened to park. The preparation of this divine goat dinner was a spectacle of casual, almost terrifying power. When Thor felt a rumble in his stomach that wasn't thunder, he would simply unhitch his trusty goats, slaughter them on the spot, and cook them for his meal. It was a no-fuss, field-to-table experience taken to its most literal extreme. Once the feast was over, Thor would carefully gather all the bones, place them back onto the hides, and then perform the most sacred act in all of culinary history. He would consecrate them with his hammer, Mjolnir. With a flash of lightning and a rumble of thunder, the goats would spring back to life, completely whole and ready to pull his chariot once more. This wasn't just recycling, it was a full-blown resurrection. It was the kind of party trick that would make any other dinner host feel deeply inadequate. You thought your sourdough starter was impressive? Thor was reanimating his dinner. Now, imagine being a guest at one of these impromptu feasts. The taste, one can only assume, was extraordinary. This wouldn't be some stringy, tough old goat. This would be a meal infused with the very essence of the storm god himself, a rich, gamey, and profoundly satisfying flavor, cooked over a fire likely started by a lightning strike. The meat would be hearty and warming, a taste of wild, untamed power. But enjoying this meal came with one very important, non-negotiable term of service. Thor had a single, simple rule for his dinner guests. You can eat your fill, but you must not, under any circumstances, break any of the bones. The integrity of the skeleton had to be preserved for the resurrection to work. This turned dinner with Thor into a high-stakes game of divine operation. Every bite was tinged with a slight sense of dread. You had to carefully strip the meat from the bone, making sure not to crack or snap anything, all while a 7-foot-tall god of thunder watched you from across the campfire. It's the kind of pressure that could make a man lose his appetite. This rule wasn't just a quirky preference, it was a deadly serious matter, as one unfortunate family found out. The story goes that Thor, traveling through Midgard, stopped for the night at the home of a poor peasant family. Being a generous, if somewhat intimidating god, he offered to share his goat-powered meal. He performed his usual ritual, killing the goats and inviting the family to eat, sternly reminding them of the "no breaking the bones" policy. But the peasant's son, a boy named Thialfi, got a little too curious. Wanting to taste the rich marrow, he took a thigh bone and, with a swift crack, split it open. The next morning, Thor gathered the bones, swung his hammer, and brought his goats back to life. But one of them, Tanningjoster, was limping. Thor, seeing the lame goat, didn't just get angry. He exploded in a fury of divine rage that probably caused localized weather events for miles around. To him, this wasn't an accident. It was a profound act of disrespect. The terrified family begged for their lives, and Thor, in a moment of mercy, decided to take both Thialfi and his sister Röskva as his eternal servants to pay off the debt. It was the worst dinner party faux pas in history, resulting in a lifetime of indentured servitude to an angry god. The tale of Thor's goats is a powerful lesson in divine hospitality. It can be generous and life-saving, but it comes with fine print written in lightning. It was a meal that was both a gift and a test, a symbol of Thor's power over life and death. But while Thor was content with reanimating his own livestock, his culinary ambitions could sometimes reach far more cosmic and, frankly, reckless proportions. After all, what's a goat compared to the ultimate catch of the day, a creature so massive it encircles the entire world? After feasting on an endless supply of self-regenerating pork and the occasional reanimated goat, one might assume the gods of Asgard would crave a change of pace. A little surf to go with their turf, perhaps? Indeed, the divine menu did include fish. But when you're a god, you don't just go down to the local stream with a fishing rod and a can of worms. You go big. You go cosmic. And no one went bigger than Thor, who once embarked on what can only be described as the most ridiculously ambitious fishing trip in the history of existence. An attempt to catch Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent. This wasn't fishing for sport. This was an attempt to literally pull the world's largest problem out of the ocean. The setup for this legendary fishing expedition reads like a tall tale told by the universe's most unhinged fisherman. Thor, disguised as a young boy, joins the giant Hymir on his boat. When Hymir refuses to share his bait, Thor, in a classic moment of divine overkill, simply wades over to Hymir's finest ox, rips its head off with his bare hands, and sticks it on a massive hook. This is not a subtle approach to angling. They row out to sea, far beyond Hymir's usual fishing grounds, to a spot where the giant is terrified to venture. There, Thor casts his ox-head-baited line into the depths, and something bites. Something so colossal, so powerful, that the very foundations of the world tremble. Thor has hooked Jormungandr, the serpent so enormous it encircles the entire world, biting its own tail. The battle that follows is epic. Thor digs his feet in so hard they break through the bottom of the boat, planting himself firmly on the ocean floor as he begins to reel in the apocalyptic sea monster. The serpent's venomous head emerges from the waves, a terrifying vision of cosmic dread. For a glorious, terrifying moment, Thor has the world's end on a fishing line. But what would have happened if he'd actually landed it? What's the recipe for cooking a creature that defines the borders of reality? Do you pan-sear it? Do you need a cauldron the size of a continent? Can you even make tartar sauce on that scale? We'll never know. Just as Thor was about to deliver a world-saving, or possibly world-ending, blow with his hammer, the terrified Hymir cut the line. Jormungandr sank back into the depths, and the world was saved from becoming Thor's personal calamari platter. Thor, in his rage, allegedly punched Hymir so hard he flew overboard and was never seen again. He had to row back to shore alone, empty-handed, with nothing but the story of the one that got away, the biggest one that got away story ever told. This grand, failed fishing trip overshadows the more mundane reality of Asgardian seafood. While Thor was out trying to catch Armageddon, the other gods were likely enjoying a much more sensible catch of the day. The rivers and lakes of Asgard were said to teem with fish, particularly salmon. The salmon held a special place in Norse mythology, often associated with wisdom and knowledge. In one tale, the trickster god Loki transforms himself into a salmon to escape the wrath of the other gods after causing the death of Balder. It didn't work, of course. He was eventually caught in a net of his own design, a moment that suggests the gods were not only familiar with salmon, but also quite adept at catching them. The salmon they ate would have been the platonic ideal of the fish, rich, oily, and pink, smoked over fragrant alderwood or poached in mead, seasoned with dill and sorrel gathered from the divine meadows. It was a clean, elegant flavor, a refreshing counterpoint to the heavy, meaty fare of the main feasts. It was a brain food, a dish for contemplation, a far cry from the brutish, all-consuming ambition of trying to eat the world's serpent. So, the divine seafood menu in Asgard was a study in contrasts. On one hand, you had the humble, respected salmon, a symbol of wisdom and a source of refined sustenance. On the other, you had the ultimate uncatchable prize, Jörmungandr, a creature that represented not food, but chaos itself. It's a perfect illustration of the Asgardian mindset. One foot planted in the practical reality of a good meal, the other kicking at the very edges of creation, just to see what bites. But after all this savory food, the pork, the goat, the fish of wisdom, the divine palate would surely crave something sweet. And in Asgard, dessert wasn't just a treat, it was the key to their very survival. In the grand, chaotic feast of Asgard, after the endless pork, the resurrected goats, and the fish of wisdom, comes the most crucial course of all. This isn't some frivolous, sugary confection to cap off the meal. This is dessert as preventative medicine. We're talking about the golden apples of Idun, the single most important item on the divine menu. These weren't your average Granny Smith. They were the mythological equivalent of a high-potency anti-aging serum, a cosmic superfood that single-handedly held back the ravages of time for an entire pantheon of gods. Without these apples, the gods of Asgard were just a bunch of exceptionally strong, very dramatic mortals with a looming expiration date. The guardian of this divine orchard was the goddess Idun. Her entire existence was dedicated to the cultivation and distribution of these miraculous fruits. She kept them in a special chest made of ash wood, and it was her sacred duty to hand them out to the gods whenever they felt the first hints of old age creeping in. A gray hair in Thor's beard, a new wrinkle on Frigg's brow. The apples themselves were described as glowing with an inner light, a visual representation of their life-giving power. The experience of eating one must have been transformative. Imagine biting into it, a crisp, clean snap, followed by a flood of ambrosial juice that tasted of sunshine, honey, and pure vitality. It wasn't just a flavor, it was a feeling, a warmth spreading through your veins, smoothing out the lines of time, sharpening your senses, and pushing back the specter of decrepitude. It was a factory reset for the divine body, ensuring the gods remained eternally in their prime, ready for an eternity of feasting and fighting. These apples were, in essence, the ultimate source of the gods' immortality. While they could be killed in battle, they were not subject to the slow, undignified decay of old age, and it was all thanks to Idun's produce isle. This made her and her apples the single most valuable and vulnerable asset in all of Asgard. The entire cosmic order depended on this divine fruit basket. Naturally, this made the apples a prime target for anyone looking to disrupt the balance of power. The most famous story of their theft involves the giant Thiazi, who, with a bit of unwilling assistance from the trickster Loki, managed to kidnap Idun and her precious apples, spiriting them away to the land of the giants, Jotunheimr. The consequences of this divine fruit napping were immediate and catastrophic. It was as if the universe's warranty had suddenly expired. Without their daily dose of golden goodness, the gods began to age, and not gracefully. They became stooped, gray, and weak. Wrinkles appeared, beards turned white, and their divine vigor faded. Asgard transformed from a hall of mighty deities into a cosmic retirement home, filled with grumpy, aching gods complaining about their backs. The panic was palpable. Odin and the others quickly realized their eternal youth was not a given, but a service they had subscribed to, and the service was now offline. Their fury turned on the one person who was always in the middle of this kind of trouble, Loki. Faced with the collective wrath of a pantheon of rapidly aging gods, Loki was given a simple ultimatum: get Idun and her apples back, or face a very painful, very permanent end. Using her falcon feather cloak, Loki flew to Jotunheimer, transformed the unsuspecting Idun into a nut for easy transport, and flew back towards Asgard with the giant Thiazi, now in the form of a massive eagle, in hot pursuit. The returning scene was frantic. The now ancient gods, seeing Loki approach with the giant eagle on his tail, quickly built a massive fire along the walls of Asgard. Loki, as the smaller falcon, swooped through safely. But Thiazi the eagle, unable to stop in time, flew straight into the flames, his feathers catching fire and sending him plummeting to his doom within Asgard's walls, where the weakened gods managed to finish him off. Idun was restored. The apples were back in circulation. And the gods, after a much-needed snack, regained their youth. This entire saga underscores the apple's role not as a mere dessert, but as the very bedrock of divine power. They were a constant, delicious reminder of their own fragility. And so, with their youth and vitality restored by this life-saving dessert, the gods could turn their attention back to the more leisurely aspects of the feast. For no meal, especially not one in Asgard, is truly complete without something to wash it all down. And the drink of the gods was no ordinary beverage. It was a concoction that could fuel a warrior's boasts or inspire a poet's greatest work. No feast, whether mortal or divine, is truly complete until the drinks are poured. It's the final act, the social lubricant that turns a simple meal into a celebration. In Asgard, this was an ironclad rule. After a long day of honorable combat and a dinner of cosmic proportions, the gods and heroes of Valhalla settled in for an evening of serious drinking, and their beverage of choice was mead, a drink as central to their identity as Thor's hammer or Odin's missing eye. But this wasn't just any fermented honey water. This was a brew of mythical potency, flowing in literal rivers from a source that is perhaps the most glorious and bizarre image in all of Norse mythology. A goat standing on the roof of the Great Hall. Her name was Heidrun, and from her udders flowed an endless supply of the finest mead, enough to keep every warrior in Valhalla blissfully intoxicated for all eternity. She was a celestial kegerator in goat form, a walking, bleeding microbrewery for the gods. The experience of drinking this standard-issue Valhallan mead was likely a world away from sipping a drink at your local bar. It would have been thick, sweet, and treacherously strong, with a golden warmth that spread through the body, chasing away the chill of the void and the lingering phantom pains of the day's battle wounds. This was the fuel for the boasting, the singing, and the epic storytelling that filled the hall each night. It was a drink that didn't just make you feel brave. It made you feel invincible, divine. This was the substance that Odin himself subsisted on, famously giving all his food to his wolves, Geri and Freki, while he partook only of the wine, or mead. It was liquid courage, liquid camaraderie, and the very lifeblood of the party at the end of the universe. But just as there are different tiers of gods, there were different tiers of mead. While the everyday stuff was for getting gloriously drunk, there existed another, far more precious concoction, the mead of poetry. This was no ordinary beverage. It was a drinkable form of pure genius. Its origin story is a journey into the strange heart of myth. It began when the two tribes of gods, the Aesir and the Vanir, sealed a truce by all spitting into a single vat. From this divine collective saliva, they created a man named Kvasir, who was the wisest being in existence. Kvasir traveled the world sharing his knowledge until he was murdered by two greedy dwarves who drained his blood into 3 great flagons, mixed it with honey, and created the legendary mead of poetry. It was a substance so powerful that a single sip could turn anyone, god, giant, or mortal, into a brilliant poet and scholar. This liquid inspiration, this mythological nootropic, was obviously the most valuable substance in the cosmos. After a series of events involving giants and murder, the mead ended up in the possession of the giant Suttungr, who hid it deep within a mountain and set his own daughter, Gunnlod, to guard it. But no treasure was safe from the ambition of Odin. The All-Father, in a saga of espionage and seduction, transformed himself into a snake, snuck into the mountain chamber, seduced Gunnlod for 3 nights, and convinced her to let him take 3 sips of the mead. In true Odin fashion, he used his 3 sips to drain all 3 flagons completely, then transformed into an eagle and made a desperate flight back to Asgard with the giant Suttungr in hot pursuit. This brings us to the final, and perhaps most revealing detail of the story. As Odin flew over the walls of Asgard, with the giant eagle closing in, he regurgitated the precious mead into vessels the other gods had prepared. This was the true mead of poetry, which he doled out to the gods and the greatest of human poets. However, in the panic of his escape, some of the mead exited from his other end. This lesser, filthier portion splattered down onto Midgard. And this, the myths tell us, is the source of all the bad poets and hacks in the world. It's a wonderfully earthy, slightly insulting explanation for why both brilliant art and terrible art exist. One is a gift from a god's mouth, the other is, well, a god's accident. So there you have it, a full-course meal from the divine tables of Asgard. A feast where the main course never dies, the takeout resurrects itself, the fishing trip could end the world, dessert is a matter of life and death, and the house brew can make you a genius. It was a menu built on magic, power, and a healthy dose of cosmic absurdity, perfectly suited for the gods who enjoyed it. Thank you for joining us on this gastronomic tour of Asgard. Until next time, may your feasts be legendary, and your mead be the good kind. History is not written in ink, but in blood. And on November the 2nd, 1985, a new, terrible chapter was written in the heart of New York City. There was no warning, no declaration of war. One moment, the city was a symphony of ordinary life. The next, it was a silent tomb. Millions of minds, in a single, shared instant, were subjected to a psychic blast of unimaginable horror. And at the epicenter of the devastation, a monstrous, bioengineered creature drew its last alien breath, having served its sole, horrifying purpose. The world was left with 3 million dead, a city scarred beyond recognition, and a question that eclipsed all others. Who could have done this? The answer was more terrifying than any external threat. It wasn't the Soviets. It wasn't an alien invasion. The architect of this damnation was one of our own, a man celebrated as the pinnacle of human achievement, a philanthropist whose genius had reshaped industries, a visionary who had dedicated his life to the betterment of mankind, a hero. His name was Adrian Veidt, but the world knew him as Ozymandias. The smartest man on the planet had just perpetrated the single greatest act of mass murder in human history. This is his black legend, the story of a hero who became a monster, a man who looked upon humanity from a height of intellectual superiority and appointed himself its judge, jury, and executioner. When confronted by his former comrades amidst the ruins of his work, his confession was not one of remorse, but of chilling, unshakable conviction. He had done it, he explained with an unnerving calm, to avert a greater catastrophe. To unite the world against a common foe and pull it back from the brink of nuclear annihilation. He had sacrificed millions to save billions. It was, in his mind, simple mathematics. But to a world reeling in grief and horror, this was not the logic of a savior. It was the rationalization of a tyrant. The ultimate expression of a god complex. An ego so vast that it saw entire cities as mere pawns on a global chessboard. His name became a byword for intellectual arrogance turned homicidal. Adrian Veidt, the man who saved the world by breaking its heart and staining its soul. He is the villain of our story, the undisputed monster. But is that the whole truth? To accept this verdict is to ignore the desperate reality of the world he lived in. It is to dismiss the terrifying calculus he faced. Before we cast our final judgment on the man, we must first put the world he sought to save on trial. We must ask what kind of a world could drive its most brilliant mind to such a desperate, monstrous solution. Because in the case of Ozymandias, the line between a monster and a savior is drawn not by the nature of the act itself, but by the alternative. And the alternative, hidden in the ticking of a doomsday clock, may have been something far, far worse. To condemn Adrian Veidt's actions is to presume the world he shattered was one worth preserving. It's easy to look back with moral certainty from a place of peace and call his solution monstrous. But the world of 1985 was not at peace. It was strapped to a time bomb, its final seconds ticking away with cold, mechanical indifference. The doomsday clock, a symbol of nuclear anxiety in our world, was a literal, ever-present countdown in his. It wasn't set to 5 minutes to midnight, or even 3. It stood at 1. A single minute away from total, global, self-inflicted annihilation. Ozymandias did not introduce horror into a tranquil world. He merely gave the impending horror a different face. The Cold War of his reality was a far more volatile beast than the one recorded in our history books. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction, the terrifying logic that kept the superpowers in check, had been rendered obsolete. It had been broken by the existence of a single, walking, talking nuclear deterrent. Dr. Manhattan. With a blue, radioactive god on its side, the United States was no longer a partner in a stalemate. It was an empire convinced of its own invincibility. This perceived invulnerability didn't lead to peace. It bred an unparalleled arrogance, pushing the nation into proxy wars and geopolitical gambles that drove the Soviet Union into a corner of rabid, desperate paranoia. The world wasn't balanced on a knife's edge. It was teetering at the peak of a mountain, and the slightest tremor threatened to send it hurtling into the abyss. And then, the unthinkable happened. The god left. Dr. Manhattan, America's ultimate weapon and the linchpin of global stability, grew weary of the petty squabbles of humankind and departed for the silent cosmos. His exit was the single greatest destabilizing event in history. Suddenly, the American trump card was gone. The Soviets saw their chance, a window of opportunity to reclaim the power they had lost. The invasion of Afghanistan wasn't just a regional conflict. It was the first move in the final endgame. With Dr. Manhattan gone, the world's conflicts would no longer be settled by a divine deterrent, but by conventional armies, and inevitably, by the nuclear arsenals that both sides had been waiting to use. Veidt understood this with perfect, terrifying clarity. Humanity, left to its own devices, was about to commit suicide. This descent was accelerated by the death of the very idea of heroism. The Keene Act of 1977 had outlawed costumed adventurers, forcing them into retirement or government service. On the surface, it was a move to curb vigilantism. In reality, it was a symptom of a deeper sickness: the centralization of power and the erosion of individual agency. The government had effectively declared that only the state had the right to solve the world's problems. The very same state that was now steering the ship of civilization directly into an iceberg. This created a vacuum of hope, filled with the brutal nihilism of the comedian, who saw the world as a sick joke, and the rigid, uncompromising absolutism of Rorschach, who could only see good and evil, but no solutions. This was the world Adrian Veidt surveyed from his ivory tower. Not a flawed but functional society, but a civilization in its death throes. A global powder keg, ignited by paranoia, destabilized by the departure of its god, and stripped of any heroes who might have offered an alternative path. The system was not failing. It had already failed. It was locked into a trajectory that could only end in a global nuclear holocaust. In such a world, what is the role of the smartest man on Earth? Is it to stand by and watch the inevitable fire consume everything? Or is it to commit an act so audacious, so world-altering, that it breaks the trajectory entirely? Before he could design his terrible salvation, Veidt first had to learn a bitter lesson, that the classic model of heroism, the one he had once championed, was utterly and tragically obsolete. Before he was the architect of a new world order, Adrian Veidt was a hero in the most traditional sense. As Ozymandias, he was a spectacle of human perfection. Dressed in the golden and purple hues of ancient royalty, he moved through the city's dark alleys like a dancer, his every action a calculated masterpiece of physics and strategy. He could catch a bullet. He could outwit any criminal. He was the living embodiment of the heroic ideal, a man who used his extraordinary gifts to protect the innocent. For a time, it seemed to be enough. For a time, he believed in the mask. But with every victory, a chilling realization dawned on his brilliant mind. Each criminal he apprehended, each conspiracy he foiled, was merely a symptom of a much deeper systemic disease. He was a doctor performing battlefield surgery on an endless stream of wounded soldiers, while ignoring the war that produced them. Stopping a bank robbery did nothing to address the economic anxieties that bred desperation. Jailing a mob boss only created a power vacuum for the next one to fill. To his intellect, it became an exercise in profound futility. He wasn't saving the world, he was merely tidying its slow, inexorable decay. This wasn't a solution, it was a distraction. His disillusionment was compounded by the very group that should have represented hope, the Watchmen. He looked at his fellow heroes and saw not a team of saviors, but a collection of deeply flawed and fractured ideologies. He saw the comedian, a man so broken by the world's darkness that he had become a monstrous parody of it, serving a corrupt system he openly despised. He saw Rorschach, a man trapped in a dangerous, unyielding absolutism, whose black and white worldview was utterly incapable of navigating the gray shades of real-world politics. And he saw Dr. Manhattan, a being of limitless power, drifting further and further away, his growing detachment making him less of a guardian and more of a passive, cosmic observer. They were not a solution. They were a microcosm of the world's problems. Nihilism, fanaticism, and apathy, all dressed in costumes. They could never unite to save the world because they couldn't even agree on what was wrong with it. And so, Adrian Veidt made a profound intellectual leap. He realized that the mask and the costume were not tools of liberation, but symbols of limitation. A hero was someone who reacted to crime. To truly save the world, he had to stop reacting and start acting. He had to stop fighting the symptoms and attack the disease itself. His public unmasking and retirement were not acts of surrender, but of strategic evolution. It was a declaration that the old ways had failed. He traded the theatricality of the vigilante for the real-world power of capital, science, and media. He built a commercial empire, not out of greed, but to acquire the resources for his true mission. He wasn't abandoning his quest to save humanity. He was escalating it to a level no one else could even conceive. He understood that the real enemy wasn't a supervillain hiding in a secret lair. The real enemy was humanity's own self-destructive nature, magnified by the political systems it had built. It was a problem that could not be punched or outsmarted in a back alley. It had to be solved on a global, psychological scale. He had to stop thinking like a hero and start thinking like a historian, a biologist, and a god. This decision, to step beyond the simple morality of good versus evil, set him on a lonely and terrible path. It was the moment the hero Ozymandias died, so that Adrian Veidt could begin his true, terrifying masterpiece, the plan to save us all. The final event in New York City was brutal, chaotic, and viscerally terrifying. But the plan that birthed it was the exact opposite: elegant, meticulous, and breathtakingly precise. This was not a madman's rampage. It was the final, devastating crescendo of a symphony composed over decades, with every note perfectly placed. Adrian Veidt's solution was a work of art, horrifying in its purpose, but undeniably a masterpiece of design. To understand the man, one must first stand in awe of the sheer, terrifying scale of his creation. It began not with a blueprint for a monster, but with a cold, dispassionate analysis of the problem. For years, Veidt fed every relevant piece of data into his supercomputers. Geopolitical tensions, economic models, resource depletion, weapons proliferation, and human psychology. He ran countless simulations, searching for a path to lasting peace. Every single one ended in failure. Diplomacy would fail. Conventional disarmament would fail. Economic pressure would fail. Every peaceful, rational, and humane path led directly to the same outcome: global nuclear war. It was from the ashes of these countless failed futures that his terrible idea arose. If humanity could not be reasoned with, it would have to be tricked. He had to invent a threat so vast, so alien, and so incomprehensible that it would make the conflict between nations seem like a childish squabble. He had to give the world a common enemy, and so he began to build a god, or rather, a monster to be mistaken for one. On a remote private island, he assembled a secret consortium of the world's most brilliant minds: Nobel-winning geneticists, visionary artists, speculative fiction writers, and pioneering sound designers. They believed they were contributing to a top-secret Hollywood film or a clandestine project to make first contact with an alien race. They were given unlimited resources and complete creative freedom to design a creature that would inspire primal terror. These brilliant, hopeful minds poured their genius into crafting the ultimate nightmare, sculpting its cyclopean form, composing its psychic death cry. Never once suspecting they were not writing a story, but building the sacrificial lamb for a global altar. It was a feat of manipulation so profound that Veidt used humanity's greatest creative talents to design the instrument of its own trauma. But creating the creature was only one piece of the puzzle. The true genius of the plan lay in the meticulous manipulation of the world stage to ensure its success. Veidt didn't just build a monster, he built the world that was ready to receive it. He orchestrated the cancer scare that drove Dr. Manhattan into exile. This was a move of breathtaking audacity. He didn't just sideline a hero. He scientifically proved a god was fallible, then used that proof to remove the one being in the universe who could perceive his plan and stop it in an instant. He carefully neutralized any other variables. When his old comrade, the comedian, stumbled upon the island and uncovered the truth, his removal was not an act of passion, but of cold, logistical necessity. He was a loose end that had to be tied. Every assassination attempt, every corporate maneuver, every piece of global news was a calculated move in his decades-long game. The final act was a marvel of technical execution. Leveraging the teleportation technology he had reverse-engineered from Dr. Manhattan's own biology, he had to transport a massive, unstable biological entity into the heart of the world's most populated city, instantly and without a trace. The margin for error was zero. A miscalculation of even a single millimeter or millisecond would have resulted in failure, or worse, a different kind of catastrophe that would have exposed his hand. But the execution was flawless. The creature appeared, unleashed its psychic wave, and died, exactly as designed. The plan worked. It worked perfectly. It was, by any measure, a work of unparalleled genius. A flawless, intricate machine of salvation, assembled in secret and powered by an intellect that bordered on the divine. It was the greatest accomplishment of the smartest man in the world. But for this machine to function, it required a terrible fuel. The fuel was the lives and sanity of 3 million innocent human beings. And this brings us to the most difficult question of all. Was the peace he engineered worth the agonizing price he chose to pay? 3 million people. It is a number so large it becomes an abstraction, a statistic devoid of faces, names, or stories. Yet for Adrian Veidt, this was not an abstraction. It was a variable in an equation. This is the part of his story that inspires the most revulsion, the moment his logic seems to curdle into pure monstrosity. How can any sane individual weigh the lives of millions against a hypothetical future and find them wanting? To answer this, we must step out of the comforting realm of traditional morality and into the cold, stark landscape of utilitarian ethics. The philosophy that the most ethical choice is the one that produces the greatest good for the greatest number. Veidt's plan was not an act of malice. It was the most extreme and horrifying application of this principle ever conceived. He was faced with the ultimate trolley problem, scaled up to a global level. On one track lay the world as it was in 1985, careening towards a guaranteed nuclear holocaust that would kill billions and render the planet uninhabitable for centuries. On the other track, a different path, one that required him to actively intervene, to pull a lever that would divert the train. But standing on that second track were the people of New York City. To do nothing was to be complicit in the death of everyone. To act was to become the hand that ended millions. Every other option, every attempt to find a third track, had been simulated and had failed. The choice was binary, absolute, and unavoidable. Most people, when faced with such a choice, would freeze. The emotional and moral weight of actively causing harm is, for most, too great a burden to bear. We are conditioned to see a difference between allowing a tragedy to happen and causing one. But Veidt's intellect allowed him, or perhaps cursed him, to see beyond this distinction. In his mind, inaction was also a choice. To stand by and watch the world burn was, in his view, the greater evil. It was an abdication of responsibility, a moral cowardice disguised as virtue. He refused to let the comforting illusion of clean hands stop him from making the only choice that led to survival. He had the courage not to be a good man, but to be a useful one. This terrible calculus also explains the method. Why an alien monster? Why a psychic shockwave? Because the goal wasn't just to kill, it was to unite. The nature of the threat had to be utterly incomprehensible, something so far outside the realm of human conflict that it would instantly render all previous enmities obsolete. It had to be a wound so profound and so bizarre that it would force the United States and the Soviet Union to look at each other not as rivals, but as fellow survivors on a suddenly hostile planet. A conventional bombing, even a nuclear one, would have simply been blamed on the other side, accelerating the very apocalypse he sought to prevent. The horror was the key. The shared trauma was the glue that would bind the shattered world back together. The 3 million did not just die. They were martyred unwillingly for the salvation of the human race. Does this make it right? The question itself may be a luxury. The concept of right and wrong presumes the existence of a future where such moral debates can be held. Veidt was operating in a context where the future itself was in question. He made a decision that is, from our perspective, morally repugnant. But it's repugnant within the framework of a world that was allowed to continue existing because of his decision. He sacrificed a piece of humanity to save the whole. He stained his soul with a crime beyond comprehension so that others could live in a world where they could afford to call him a monster. He looked at the equation, saw the terrible, unavoidable price for peace, and he had the audacity to pay it. The plan was a success. The world, shocked and terrified by a seemingly existential threat, pulled back from the brink. In the aftermath of the New York massacre, old enmities dissolved. The Soviet Union and the United States, moments away from mutual annihilation, declared an unprecedented era of cooperation. News channels broadcast images of Russian and American soldiers embracing, united against a common, unknowable foe. The doomsday clock, for the first time in decades, began to move backward. Adrian Veidt had done it. He had accomplished the impossible. He had saved the world. And his reward was not a triumph, but a profound and eternal solitude. In his Antarctic sanctuary, Karnak, surrounded by the screens broadcasting his victory, Veidt was not a conqueror celebrating on his throne. He was a prisoner in a fortress of his own making. He had reached the summit of human achievement, a lonely peak where the air was too thin for anyone else to breathe. The very intellect that allowed him to conceive of his plan now condemned him to be its sole keeper. He could share his victory with no one, for the victory itself was built on a monumental lie. To the world, he was the benevolent philanthropist Adrian Veidt, mourning alongside everyone else. Only he knew the truth, that he was both the world's savior and its greatest villain, a paradox that no one else could ever comprehend. His isolation was brutally crystallized in the confrontation with his former peers. When Night Owl and Silk Spectre arrived, they saw the evidence and recoiled in horror, their conventional moral frameworks utterly shattered by the scale of his actions. They could not see the logic, only the blood. They called him a monster, a butcher, their friendship and respect turning to ash. But the most devastating confrontation was with Dr. Manhattan, the blue god, the one being who could truly understand the cosmic scale of Veidt's thinking, validated his logic. The opposing stances of the Cold War revitalized in a new union, Manhattan observed with detached clarity. The world's security is your responsibility now. He understood. And then he left, forever, leaving Veidt utterly alone with his burden. He had earned the comprehension of a god, only to lose him to the stars. And then there was Rorschach, the unyielding, uncompromising moral absolutist. While the others could be reasoned with, forced to accept the horrifying new reality for the sake of peace, Rorschach could not. He saw no shades of gray, only the stark black and white of his own rigid code. Never compromise, not even in the face of Armageddon. For him, the deaths of millions could never be justified, no matter the outcome. Veidt's plea for silence was met with a defiant snarl. In that moment, Veidt knew that Rorschach was a threat not to him, but to the fragile peace he had just created. The journal, filled with Rorschach's suspicions, was a ticking time bomb that could undo everything. Its publication would tear the new world apart, reigniting the very fires Veidt had sacrificed so much to extinguish. He did not kill Rorschach. That final, tragic act was left to Dr. Manhattan, another cold, logical move to protect the new status quo. But the threat of Rorschach's journal remained, a loose thread that could unravel his entire grand design. Veidt's work was not over on November the 2nd. His was not a single act, but a life sentence. He was now the silent guardian of his own terrible lie, forever vigilant, forever alone, haunted by the question he posed to Dr. Manhattan in the moments after his victory. I did the right thing, didn't I? It all worked out in the end. The silence that followed was his true reward. Not the gratitude of billions, but the chilling, unending quiet of a savior who can never be thanked, and whose sins can never be forgiven. So we arrive at the end of our case. The evidence has been presented. We have seen the world as it was, a civilization teetering on the precipice of self-destruction, 1 minute from a nuclear midnight. We have examined the hero, a man of unparalleled genius who realized that traditional heroism was a fool's errand in the face of systemic collapse. We have dissected his plan, a terrifying, audacious, and brilliant masterpiece of psychological warfare, born from the cold logic that the only way to save humanity was to deceive it. And we have confronted the horrific price of that deception, the sacrifice of 3 million souls on the altar of global peace. The prosecution's case is simple and emotionally potent. Adrian Veidt is a mass murderer. He is the ultimate expression of intellectual hubris, a man who appointed himself God and remade the world in his own image, baptizing it in blood. He did not ask for consent. He did not seek a mandate. He imposed his will upon the entire planet, driven by a chillingly rational calculus that dehumanized millions, reducing them to mere numbers in his grand equation. He is a monster, cloaked in the robes of a philosopher king, and the peace he created is a fragile illusion, forever tainted by the horror of its birth. This is the black legend of Ozymandias, and it is a compelling one, but the defense argues for a different verdict. It asks us to judge him not by the comfortable moral standards of a world at peace, but by the desperate standards of a world at war with itself. His actions were not born of malice, but of a terrifying clarity. He saw a future that everyone else refused to acknowledge, a guaranteed apocalypse born of human folly. Every path he simulated, every peaceful alternative, ended in global fire. He was faced with a choice not between good and evil, but between a terrible outcome and a catastrophic one. In that impossible position, he had the intellectual courage and the moral fortitude to choose the lesser of two apocalypses. His was an act of profound, albeit terrifying, compassion. He did not seek power, fame, or wealth. He already possessed those in abundance. He sought the survival of a species he believed was too stubborn and too short-sighted to save itself. He dirtied his soul so that billions of others could live, untroubled by the knowledge of how close they came to oblivion. He accepted the burden of being history's greatest monster in order to prevent a future where there would be no historians left to judge him. The peace he forged was real. The lives he saved, 6 billion of them, were real. The unity he created, however fragile, was real. These are not the accomplishments of a simple villain. Ultimately, the judgment of Adrian Veidt forces us to confront the most uncomfortable of questions. What is the true measure of a hero? Is it moral purity, or is it results? Is it better to be a good man who stands by his principles while the world burns, or a flawed man who transgresses every moral boundary to save it? Ozymandias stands as a monument to this dilemma. He is a savior we want to condemn, a monster we are forced to thank. He is the man who looked upon the face of Armageddon and did not blink. He made an unforgivable choice to achieve an undeniable good. The final verdict, then, is left not to history, but to each of us. Is Adrian Veidt a tyrant with a god complex? Or is he the tragic, necessary, and reluctant savior of all mankind? The man we call a monster may just be the only true hero his world ever had.